Imagine two men sitting across a table. One holds a pen, the other holds a bomb. The world is watching. The clock is ticking. One signature could end a war. One wrong word could restart it. Right now, today in 2026, this is not a movie. This is real life. The United States and Iran are inches away from a deal, but they haven't signed it. Why? What is stopping them? And what happens to the rest of the world if they don't? Stay with me because the answer is far more complicated than anything the headlines are telling you. Let's go back to the beginning. Not because history is boring, but because you cannot understand the delay in these ceasefire talks without understanding how this war actually started. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched one of the most significant military operations in modern history. It was not a warning shot. It was not a limited strike. It was a coordinated campaign aimed at destroying Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure and its nuclear program in one decisive blow. The world woke up that morning to news that changed everything. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed in the strikes. This was not just a military development. This was seismic. Khomeini had led Iran for over 3 decades. He was the face of the Islamic Republic. He was the voice of resistance against what Tehran called Western imperialism. And in a single night, he was gone. Iran did not collapse. Iran did not surrender. That is the first thing you need to understand about why these talks are so complicated today. Iran fired back. Hard. They launched missiles at United States military bases across the region. They struck targets in Israel. They hit civilian and military locations in Arab states. And then they did something that sent shockwaves through every stock market on Earth. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. If you don't know what the Strait of Hormuz is, let me explain why this one decision changed the entire war. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. It is roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. And through that 21-mile channel passes nearly 20% of the world's total oil supply every single day. When Iran closed that strait, global oil prices shot upward, shipping costs exploded. Countries that depend on Gulf oil started panicking. And suddenly, this war between the United States and Iran was no longer just a regional conflict. It became everyone's problem. This is the moment when the world started paying very close attention. Now, here is where the story gets interesting, and a little absurd. Because what followed was a series of deadlines that kept getting extended, like a lease nobody wanted to renew. After the initial strikes, Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender. Those were his exact words. Unconditional surrender. He set a deadline of March 21st for a deal. No deal came. He moved it to March 23rd. Still nothing. Moved it again to April 7th. He threatened on that day, and these were his actual words, that, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be. It's brought back if Iran did not make a deal. Administration officials later admitted that post was improvisational, not part of any formal national security strategy. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful military in the world is issuing civilization-ending threats on social media without a formal strategy behind it. And Iran is watching every word. But then something unexpected happened. Pakistan stepped in. Pakistan offered to mediate. And on April 8, 2026, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. Just 2 weeks. No permanent solution. No final deal. Just a pause. The world exhaled, but only briefly. Because within days it became clear that this ceasefire was fragile at best and fictitious at worst. Iranian parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said at the time that a bilateral ceasefire or negotiations was unreasonable. The deputy speaker of the Iranian parliament said he had faith in the military, but not in the negotiations. In a written statement from Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the assassinated supreme leader, was read on Iranian state television, saying to stop firing for the time being, but promising revenge. That is not the language of a side that is ready to make a permanent peace. Now let's get into the real substance. Because the reason this deal is delayed is not just political posturing. It is because both sides want fundamentally different things, and some of those things appear to be completely incompatible. Here is what the United States wants from Iran. Number 1. Zero nuclear enrichment. Not reduced enrichment. Not limited enrichment. Zero. The United States' position has been consistent since 2025. Iran must stop enriching uranium entirely. This is the hardest line in the sand. J.D. Vance put it plainly when he said the core goal is for Iran to give an affirmative commitment that it will not seek a nuclear weapon and will not seek the tools that would enable it to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. Number 2, the Strait of Hormuz must reopen immediately and without conditions. Trump was explicit about this. He said the pause in United States strikes was subject to what he called the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, not a negotiated opening, not a told opening, an unconditional one. Number 3, Iran must stop supporting armed proxy groups across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, armed factions in Iraq and Yemen. The United States wants these connections severed as part of any deal. Number 4, limits on Iran's ballistic missile program. The missiles that have been flying across the region for weeks are not just military tools, they are political tools, and Washington wants them constrained permanently. Now here's what Iran wants. Number 1, a complete lifting of all sanctions, not gradual relief, not conditional relief. A full removal of the economic stranglehold that has been crushing the Iranian economy for years. Iran's economy has been devastated by sanctions since 2018, when the United States pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal. Inflation has been brutal. Ordinary Iranians have suffered enormously. Tehran wants that pain acknowledged and reversed. Number 2, the release of frozen Iranian assets worth billions of dollars held around the world. Number 3, war reparations. Iran wants compensation for the damage done by United States and Israeli strikes. This is a non-starter for Washington, but Tehran keeps putting it on the table. Number 4, international recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. This is perhaps the most explosive demand. Iran wants a new mechanism that gives it some form of authority over the waterway it sits beside. The United States has been equally clear that this is unacceptable. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said under no circumstances can we live in a world where you have to coordinate with Iran or pay them a toll to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And number 5, Iran insists on retaining its right to enrich uranium, even if the amount and the level are negotiable. The right itself is not negotiable, according to Iranian officials. The head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization stated directly that Iran will not accept limits on its nuclear enrichment. The United States says zero enrichment. Iran says enrichment is a sovereign right. The United States says open Hormuz with no conditions. Iran says it wants a new governance mechanism for Hormuz. These are not small gaps. These are canyons. But here is where the story takes another turn. Because despite all of this conflict, despite all of the contradictions, something has been quietly taking shape behind the scenes. As of early May 2026, negotiators from both sides have been working on what is being described as a one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding. A simple document. It's not a full peace treaty, not a final agreement. Just a framework. A way of saying, we agree to keep talking, and here are the things we are willing to put on the table. According to officials briefed on the discussions, the MO would declare an end to the war and begin a 30-day period of detailed negotiations. During that 30 days, both sides would gradually lift their blockades of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran would open the strait. The United States would lift its naval blockade of Iranian ports that had been in place since April 13th. Frozen Iranian assets would be released. Sanctions would gradually be eased. And critically, Iran would commit to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment. The details of the moratorium became one of the most contentious points of negotiation. The United States proposed a 20-year moratorium. Iran proposed 5 years. Sources say the likely landing spot is somewhere between 12 and 15 years. After the moratorium expires, Iran could enrich uranium, but only to the low level of 3.67%. That is the same level agreed to in the original 2015 nuclear deal. There are additional demands in the framework. Iran would commit to never seeking a nuclear weapon. Iran would commit to not operating underground nuclear facilities. Iran would submit to an enhanced inspections regime, including SNAP inspections by United Nations nuclear monitors. And Iran would hand over or allow the removal of its highly enriched uranium stockpile.
Oh.
This sounds like progress. And in some ways, it is the most progress the two sides have made since the war began. But there are enormous complications. And 3 of them in particular are what is truly delaying a final answer. Wall number 1, is the uranium question. As of the time this script was written, Iran had in its possession more than 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Experts say that is enough material that, with further enrichment, could theoretically produce multiple nuclear weapons. The head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization has said publicly that Iran will not accept limits on nuclear enrichment. Iranian Parliament Speaker Galibov called news of nuclear concessions fake news and posted on social media that Operation Trust Me Bro had failed. Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi has taken a more moderate tone. He has expressed willingness to discuss the amount and level of enrichment, even while insisting the right to enrich cannot be surrendered. This tension inside Iran between the moderate diplomats and the hardline parliamentarians and Revolutionary Guard commanders is itself a major obstacle. American officials have reportedly said that the Trump administration believes Iranian leaders are of two minds. The negotiating team in Islamabad appears willing to make concessions, but every time they do, they have to go back to Tehran for approval. And Tehran is not a unified voice. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has its own political power base, operates on its own logic. The parliament has its own agenda. And the new supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei is still consolidating power in the aftermath of his father's assassination. This internal division inside Iran may be the biggest hidden obstacle in these negotiations. Wall number 2 is the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a geographic bottleneck. It is a symbol. For Iran, it represents the one weapon it has that can genuinely hurt the global economy. As long as Iran controls access to the strait, it has leverage. The moment it opens the strait unconditionally, it loses that leverage forever. Iran's proposal calls for a new mechanism governing the strait. Some analysts believe this means Iran wants a formal international body that gives Tehran a seat at the table in determining who can pass and under what conditions. The United States interprets this as Iran wanting to control a global trade route, and that is something Washington will not accept under any terms. The two blockades sitting in the strait right now represent this deadlock perfectly. Iran is restricting commercial shipping. The United States Navy is blockading Iranian ports. Both sides are choking each other economically. And neither side wants to be the first to blink, because being first to blink means losing leverage. Wall number 3 is the Lebanon problem. The ceasefire between the United States and Iran technically did not include Lebanon. Trump said explicitly that Lebanon was not part of the deal because of Hezbollah. Iran's chief negotiator said that any negotiations with the United States are unreasonable. The Israel-Hezbollah conflict is ongoing. Israel has continued striking Beirut even after a separate ceasefire was announced. The WHO has verified over 150 attacks on healthcare facilities in Lebanon since the war began. More than 2,300 people have died in Lebanon's fighting. Every time Israel launches a new strike in Beirut, it creates a political crisis inside Tehran. Iranian hardliners use those strikes as evidence that America cannot be trusted, that any deal with the United States is a surrender, that signing a peace agreement while Hezbollah burns is a betrayal of the resistance axis that Iran has built over 4 decades. This is why the talks keep stalling. This is why every step forward is followed by a step back. While the United States and Iran negotiate, the rest of the world is holding its breath, not quietly. The Qatari Prime Minister flew to Washington and told reporters there is a high probability of a deal. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reportedly pushed Trump to pause the naval operation in the Strait of Hormuz to keep negotiations alive. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has been working around the clock to keep both delegations at the table. India's foreign ministry called for an early end to the conflict to restore unimpeded trade through the strait. China and Russia both welcomed the ceasefire. Russia offered to take Iran's enriched uranium as part of any settlement. China was confirmed by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt to have been involved in the truce negotiations. Both Beijing and Moscow have strong economic reasons to want the strait open. China buys enormous volumes of Iranian oil. Russia wants a precedent where American military force is seen to fail in its objectives. Germany urged Iran to respect the ceasefire and take advantage of the opportunity. France expressed concern about the situation in Lebanon. The European Union called the ceasefire much-needed de-escalation. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was less diplomatic. He said that momentary relief cannot make us forget the chaos and destruction and lives lost, and that Spain will not applaud those who set the world on fire just because they show up with a bucket. That line from Spain captures something real. Because right now the world is watching two powers negotiate the terms of a conflict they both claim to want to end, while small-scale strikes continue to be exchanged in southern Lebanon. The United Arab Emirates has intercepted hundreds of Iranian missiles and drones since the war began. At least 3,375 people have been killed in Iran, according to Iranian authorities. 23 people have died in Israel, thousands more across the region. This is not a frozen conflict. This is a simmering one. Here is one of the most important developments that most people have missed in the coverage of these talks. The United States has quietly shifted its position. At the start of the war, Washington outlined 4 clear objectives: destroy Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, dismantle its navy, sever its support for armed proxy groups, and ensure Iran never obtained a nuclear weapon. A 15-point proposal sent to Tehran in late March called for the dismantling of nuclear facilities at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo. It called for handing over highly enriched uranium to the IAE. It called for permanently prohibiting nuclear weapons development. But by early May, Secretary of State Rubio declared that Operation Epic Fury, the military campaign launched on February 28, was concluded. What Washington now seeks is not victory in the traditional sense. It is a memorandum of understanding to begin future negotiations. Rubio himself said, quote, "We don't have to have the actual agreement written in one day, but we have to have a diplomatic solution that is very clear on the topics they are willing to negotiate on." Compare that to Trump's earlier language of unconditional surrender and a whole civilization dying. The tone has changed. The objectives have quietly narrowed. Analysts at King's College London describe this shift as a limited but meaningful concession from Washington. An Iranian analyst told Al Jazeera that the balance of deterrence is currently skewed in Iran's favor, and that this reality is slowly sinking in Washington. This is not weakness. This is pragmatism, because the alternative to a deal is the resumption of strikes. And nobody wants that. Not the oil markets. Not the Gulf states. Not the shipping companies. Not the American military families with service members stationed in the region. And if the polls are to be believed, not most Americans either, despite a Rasmussen poll showing. 57% supported the initial attack on Iran back in mid-2025. Let's talk about the scenario everyone hopes to avoid. If the ceasefire collapses and the war resumes, the consequences extend far beyond Iran and the United States. The Strait of Hormuz stays closed. Global oil prices continue their upward spiral. Countries in Asia and Europe that depend on Gulf energy face shortages. Inflation returns to levels not seen since the early 2020s. Shipping insurance becomes prohibitively expensive. Supply chains that were already stressed from years of disruption break again. In Iran, the human cost deepens. The country's military infrastructure has already been severely damaged. The economy was struggling before the war. It is in crisis now. The closure of Hormuz cuts off Iran's own imports and exports. Iran needs the strait open too. The new Bureau of Persian Gulf Strait that Tehran established to collect taxes from ships passing through is a sign that Iran wants revenue from the waterway, not just leverage over it. In the United States, political pressure builds. The war is unpopular at home. The Trump administration wants a win. A peace deal framed as American strength forcing Iran to the table is politically valuable. A resumed bombing campaign with no clear endpoint is not. And in the broader Middle East, the risk of wider escalation grows. Hezbollah still has weapons. Israel is still striking. The proxy networks that Iran built across the region have not been dismantled. Each day without a deal is another day the kindling stays dry. So what is actually delaying the final answer? It is not one thing. It is a cluster of things that all interact with each other in ways that make simple solutions impossible. It is the gap between zero enrichment and sovereign enrichment rights. It is the gulf between unconditional Hormuz access and a new governance mechanism for the strait. It is the internal divisions inside Iran between pragmatic diplomats and hardline commanders who believe any deal is surrender. It is the Lebanon factor. Every Israeli strike on Beirut gives Iran's hardliners ammunition to kill the negotiations. It is the trust deficit between two countries that have been adversaries for nearly 5 decades. Since 1979, the United States and Iran have not had formal diplomatic relations. They have no embassies in each other's countries. They have been talking through intermediaries for months. Direct talks only happened for the first time in decades on April 14, 2026. One meeting in Islamabad. The Pakistani officials in the room produced a 10-day ceasefire extension. The next meeting extended it 3 more weeks. It is the domestic politics on both sides. Trump needs this to look like American strength. Iran's new supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei needs this to not look like surrender. Those two needs are pulling in opposite directions, and it is the sheer weight of history. The 2015 nuclear deal was supposed to solve the nuclear question. The United States walked out of it in 2018. Iran accelerated its enrichment in response. Now here they are again, trying to build trust over a question that has no easy answer. How do you verify that a country will not build a nuclear weapon? How do you create enforcement mechanisms that both sides believe will actually work? How do you write a 14-point memo that holds together when the next political wind blows through either capital? Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi said in early May 2026 that an agreement was just inches away. But he also criticized what he called maximalist demands from United States negotiators. Inches sound small. But in diplomacy between adversaries, inches can feel like miles. The one-page memo is being drafted. The moratorium duration is being argued. The Hormuz sequencing is being debated. Whether to settle the strait first and deal with nuclear issues later is itself a major point of contention. Whether the sanctions relief comes before or after Iranian concessions is another. Trump himself captured the tension perfectly. He said the war has a very good chance of ending. Then he added, if it doesn't end, we have to go back to bombing the hell out of them. That is the deal in a sentence. Hope on one side, force on the other. And a one-page document sitting somewhere between Islamabad and Tehran waiting to be signed. The Qatari Prime Minister believes a deal will come. Pakistan is working every hour to make it happen. Saudi Arabia is pushing from the sidelines. China and Russia are watching and calculating. And the Iranian foreign minister wants to talk to Europeans in Berlin, Paris, and London as an alternative channel. The world is not giving up on diplomacy. Not yet. But the window is narrow. Trump has made clear he does not want to extend the ceasefire indefinitely. Iran's hardliners are pushing back against every concession. And the small exchanges of fire in southern Lebanon keep reminding everyone that this ceasefire is nominal at best. Here is what I want you to take away from all of this. The delay in these ceasefire talks is not simply diplomatic failure. It is the collision of decades of mistrust, decades of sanctions, decades of proxy wars, decades of broken promises, and decades of competing visions for what the Middle East should look like. The United States wants a Middle East where Iran is constrained, where nuclear weapons are impossible, where trade flows freely without anyone holding the world's oil supply hostage. Iran wants a Middle East where its sovereignty is respected, where sanctions are history, where it is recognized as a major regional power with rights over the waters it borders. Neither vision is entirely unreasonable, but they have never coexisted peacefully. And right now the question is whether a one-page document can build a bridge between them. The final answer is delayed because the final answer requires both sides to give up something they believe is fundamental to their survival. That is always the hardest kind of deal to make. It's not because the negotiators lack skill, not because the mediators lack commitment, but because both sides are being asked to trust an adversary they have every historical reason not to trust. And yet the alternative is more bombs, more deaths, more closed straits, more burning oil prices, more grieving families. On both sides of a conflict that nobody elected to have. So stay watching, stay informed. Because what happens in Islamabad in the coming days could reshape the Middle East for the next generation. It could open the Strait of Hormuz. It could lock Iran's nuclear program in a cage. Or it could fall apart completely and send us back to a war that nobody knows how to end. This is the story of our time. And it is not over yet.